Hello, Shehan. Good morning. How do you feel?
Like you said, what a wonderful morning. The sun's up there, blue skies, and we have this mountain range and no clouds. And yeah, I'm glad I woke up. I was a bit grumpy, but yeah.
So
good to be here.
Sri Lanka is known for its sea, and from the sea to the mountains, how has the transition been to you?
Yeah, I mean, we have our mountains, nothing on this scale, obviously. There's nowhere in the world on this scale. But yeah, we've been loving the landscape. We live in Colombo, live in Kurunegala, a lot of greenery, but to come here and just walk around, feel the energy, be on the lake. So it's a lovely setting for a lit fest, and I've had a good 3 days there. Met some very fantastic writers and some passionate readers. It's been good.
So what made you decide to come to the Nepal Literature Festival?
Well, I get invited these days. 3 months ago, no one invited me anywhere. Now everyone's inviting me everywhere. And of course, it was Christmas, and I've got young kids, and staying home for Christmas is important. But brought the family over, and it's been a magical Christmas in Nepal.
So how was your overall impression or experience of the festival?
I think we've been looked after very well. And the weather's also been quite kind. It's been strange climate you have. It's freezing in the morning, and then the sun comes up, and now you want to take off your coats. And but yeah, we've been just walking around, and there's so much to see, and just taking in the sights and talking to the people. I think one thing that's been wonderful is a lot of readers have been connecting with me, and we signed a lot of books, and it's you sit and write a book by yourself for so long. It's good to connect with people in different parts of the world who are reading it.
Yeah. So I've seen you for a few days now, and the most beautiful part about this experience is that you're always with your family. So what does family mean for you?
Yeah, so it's tough. It's going to be tough for the next 12 months because looks like I'll be on planes all the time, and won't be able to the kids have school, and won't be able to travel. So I'll be away from family a lot. But yeah, my days are usually spent in my room, not talking to anyone. So it's good, after 8 hours of writing, to go out and play with the kids and kind of connect with the family. But yeah, it's going to be tough this year, but this Christmas has been great. So it's good to have them traveling with you when you're doing these sessions.
So if you have to name somebody or something as your inspiration, who inspires you, or what inspires you to write, or just be Shehan Karunatilaka?
No, there are so many things that inspire you. To write, I just live in Sri Lanka, and there's so many. It's a beautiful place. It's as beautiful as this place, but there's so many absurd things that happen that just get me scribbling stories and ideas. And so I think just everyday life, just being in South Asia, it's such a beautiful and ugly and volatile place. And it's also a place with great potential. So I think those things inspire me to write. But generally this is the usual things, books and movies and music, certainly, and travel. I think those are the things that inspire me. I'm going to be doing a lot of traveling. Hopefully I can do a lot of reading. Hope to be doing some writing, but let's see.
So you were very fond of your kids, of course. So in what ways do your kids inspire you, or what impact do they have in your life as a writer or a father?
Well, without them, I'm sure I would have written more books. I think, they did slow down so when I started this book, the kids were quite young, 1 and 3, and so it was quite challenging to do it. Now they're they're better behaved. When I shut the door, they don't come in and stuff, and they leave me alone. So, but I think having kids, it's like getting married is like moving to a different country. I think having kids is like moving to a different planet. You can't really comprehend how your entire life, the upheaval and so on. But it's also inspiring. I mean, I've written now kids' books because you can see them learning, and you can also see how try as you might, their personalities come out. They're born with these certain traits and personalities, and you don't know. Some you can track, okay, they get that from their mom or from me, but some is their own, and so that's interesting. And just watching someone discover the world again through fresh eyes, and the kids' books directly inspired by adventures with them. But yeah, it's all part of the adventure, I think.
Yeah, I'm fond of kids too. I think today we're so much like driven by hustle and work that we sometimes forget the simplicity and innocence of life, that we started from nothing and how complicated it has been now. So looking at kids, it's you get reminded of that ground, where you came from. So your kids are amazing, of course. So who are your favorite authors to read to? What Booker Prize winners, previous winners do you look up to? Or tell us about your book preferences in general.
Oh, so many too. I mean, the name that keeps coming up for me is Uncle Kurt Vonnegut. For my first book also, I was writing from the point of view of an old man who was a bit cantankerous, a bit grumpy, but also quite funny and witty. And Kurt Vonnegut he writes about such grim things, such depressing things about how humanity is just destroying itself. But his books are a riot. They're just so funny. In one sentence, he can break your heart and make you smile and make you think. And guys like that, and Douglas Adams, George Saunders, Margaret Atwood, people who write books on very difficult subjects, but reading them is not difficult, and that's something I really aspire to. In terms of previous Booker winners, there's been so many. I mean, I'm reading the shortlist at the moment. Percival Everett's The Trees, Elizabeth Strout's O. William. Those are the ones I've just finished. I'm just about to start on Glory and small things like these. But Bernardine Evaristo, Girl, Woman, Other, I remember read that quite recently, and that moved me, and really... I was in awe of that, as well as George Saunders' Lincoln in the Bardo. But you can't go past the South Asian heroes that taught us that South Asians can write as well as anyone else. So Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children, Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things, Arvind Adiga, Kiran Desai. So there's inspiration all around in our part of the world, and I've discovered. I'm reading Amish Mulmi, my friend, and reading a bit more about Nepal. And I think each place you go to, there's inspiration and there's new writers to discover.
Of course. Thank you. So I think somebody's personal individual style tells a lot about their personality. And when I look at you, you have a very cool style, I would describe it. If I have to describe it in a word, it would be cool with the...
Not much thought goes into this style, but okay, fine, yeah.
So are you inspired by fashion, or do you keep up with the trend?
No. I've been rocking this look since the early 90s. I think it's just fashion catches up with you. So I grew up in the grunge era. I don't know if people remember what grunge was. It was alternative rock, but it was guys who... Unlike the 80s where everyone wore leather pants and had big hair, the grunge guys just wore jeans and flannel shirts and had scruffy facial hair and piercings. And so I guess, I've had the man bun is now supposed to be cool. I've had the man bun since like 1991. And so I haven't changed my look at all, and it hasn't always been cool. Facial hair, I don't know. I haven't shaved. Every time I shave, my children scream at me, so I think the beard has to stay. But no, I don't follow fashion trends or anything.
On that note, so we know that at one time of your life you aspired to become a rock musician, and then you took a left turn, or may I say a right turn, and became a writer. So do you still have that desire to hold a bass guitar, climb on stage and give like crazy performances like Flea of Red Hot Chili Peppers, Flea.
Oh yeah.
Flea, I'm sorry. And make the stadium like full of audience go gaga? Do you still have these aspirations?
No, well, I'd aspire to be Flea for sure. I mean, I study his stuff and yeah, that. But you said rock musician. I think, these are adolescent dreams, right? I think we want to be things called rock stars. I don't know if they even exist because rock music is sort of in decline or has been. No, so the problem was I never was a musician. I never practiced I wrote every day. I had guitars. I would only play if I had a band or I had a gig to play for. And I think that's quite telling. But strangely, since the pandemic, I was at home filled with unread books like we all are. So I read a lot and I finished this book and I wrote a few other things. But I bought instruments, so I started learning the piano. I just bought a drum kit just before the Booker as a little prize to myself. And I've got a bass and a couple of guitars. And so I use it as part of my routine. So now I'm trying to be a musician. So being on stage and look, I'm middle-aged man. I don't think there's any call for, middle-aged men to get on stage and play rock music. Though I probably might form a middle-aged band with a midlife crisis band, as they say, and, play Pink Floyd covers and all that. But yeah, now I enjoy music just for the joy of learning. There's a lifetime of learning. I'm just playing piano, playing a scale for 10 minutes. It's like a meditation. So yeah, now I aspire to be a musician, whether I go on stage or not. Now I go on stage anyway, right? And I talk about books. So that part of it is not really, But I'd love to be in a band and love to keep playing music. It's such a gift, especially when you've been thinking of heavy subjects and writing. This is a good escape. But also my kids are learning music, so so that's a good excuse to buy a drum kit and
Okay.
Yeah.
So I read it somewhere, without music, life would just be a mistake. So I think it inspires us, connects us. It's therapeutic, isn't it? So from the Booker now you aim at the Grammys, I see.
Yeah, no. Not at all. But music, this silence that we have here in Nepal, in Pokhara, and I've experienced, that's something as well. If you say, I guess you can't convey it through the camera, but this kind of silence, and you can hear a few bird sounds and all that. It's quite a special place. But yeah, most of the time I live in a city where there's cars, and so having the headphones and the music helps.
Yeah, of course. So now let's talk about the book that won the Booker Prize. I should have started with it, but I tried to postpone it. So, The 7 Moons of Mali Almeida. Did I pronounce it correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So first, who is Mali Almeida?
Well, you'll have to read the book. It took me 7 years to discover, but on a basic level, he's a war photographer. He's living in the late 80s, during the 80s, and that's a volatile time for Sri Lanka. There's a civil war, there's a Marxist uprising, there's the Indian peacekeeping force on the ground. So he's photographing, and there's a lot of dead bodies, and there's a lot of atrocities happening, and which people aren't aware of. So yeah, he's a war photographer going around, and he's also a gambler. He's a closet gay man, so maybe that's the reason why he goes to these dangerous places, so he can express himself. And so he ends up dead. That's the whole premise of the book. And people were ending up dead in 89. Bodies were appearing, there were unsolved murders, so he was one of those. And the story is he has 7 moons or 7 days to find out which of the dangerous people he was working from had him killed. And so it's really a murder mystery. But who Mali Almeida is, I think he starts, I don't want to interpret it for you, but he starts off as perhaps a very unlikable, selfish character who's an atheist, a nihilist, doesn't believe in a god, has seen so many terrible things, just believes it's an evil, random universe, and then he wakes up in the afterlife and he has to kind of make sense of the universe and of his own life and of what happened to him. And maybe he goes on a journey and he finds out things about the people he loved, and that's the story. But on a basic level, he was a colorful character, a middle-class Colombo guy who went to these very dangerous places and took these spectacular photographs.
Of course. Yeah. So most of the times, especially in South Asia, where we're so influenced by Bollywood, we look forward to characters that are ideal, or, we imagine a sort of utopia in their character. But I think personally, because I've gone through the book, I think Mali Almeida is flawed somewhere. So what are your opinions about flawed characters? Are they important? Why is it important to write about them, talk about them, the flaws in a character?
Well, I think we're all flawed characters. That's the reality. And this ideal hero I don't know if you see it that much anymore, this sort of hero who embodies the good and just makes all the right decisions. We live in, and we, for some time, if you look in cinema, the anti-hero has tended to be more interesting. If you just look at television, we watch the Breaking Bads and all that, following these characters who aren't good guys by any stretch, but you may not like them, but you're interested to see whether you're rooting for them in a sense, or you're interested in their quest. And so yeah, that's always been something. Even my first book was a drunk, not very nice old man who was drinking himself to death and just neglecting his family and watching cricket. And this character, it was just interesting to me. And I think that's what you write. You write characters that compel you. And this was a problem, I think, when we were editing it. A lot of people with the first version of the book, Chats with the Dead, they said Maali's not very likable. And
yeah.
And then we did few things in the edits to actually, if not make him likable, make him understandable. You can understand where his resentment comes from. He's got daddy issues. He's also living in this chaotic country and seeing these horrible things. And so you maybe understand, and you maybe see the semblance of a heart as the book goes on. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's essential that you have good versus evil and that your main character be good. I mean, if you want to explore that, you can. But for me, it's more interesting to explore real characters and look at his quest. And yeah, I think we are all flawed, and we have more of appetite now for the anti-hero because we know the idealized character doesn't exist. And Bollywood, I think what I'm writing is far from Bollywood. And even Bollywood, I've seen the certain, now the type of protagonist also has their sort of dark side to them. And so, yeah, I think these things are evolving, getting more sophisticated.
So when I was reading The Seven Moons of Mali Almeida, I just turned through the book, and the intro that got my attention immediately, which is there are only two gods worth worshipping: chance and electricity. And I found that fascinating. Could you tell us about this? Why did you write this?
So this was So all my books start with this little quote thing, and it usually comes from the mouth of one of my characters. The first one is, if a liar tells you he is lying, is he telling the truth? Yeah, if a liar tells you he's lying, is he telling the truth? And that's something that WG talks about. So this is something, I think it comes from the dead leopard, or it also perhaps comes from Maali. Because Maali doesn't believe in, he's convinced, how can there be a god or gods and let these terrible things happen in Sri Lanka to these innocent people, and let these terrible people get away with crime. So he looks at the moral balance of the universe, and doesn't believe that. And he believes he's a gambler, chance. He believes the fact that we are all part of the birth lottery. And I've written a book called my short story collection called The Birth Lottery. And I'm intrigued by this concept that we are all accidents of our birth, because I was born in middle-class Colombo in the 80s. If I was born, and my father was a doctor, if I was a doctor's son in Jaffna, same in the 80s, my life would have been very, very different. Who knows if I'd still be around? I'd certainly get more entangled in the war. So I'm curious about the role that luck plays in our lives. Even winning a Booker, this is luck. My book, in another set of judges, my book may have not made the long list. And it would have just been another book that came out from South Asia. So this roll of the dice, which Maali is very intrigued by in his gambling. So when he all the money he makes, he gambles. And he doesn't see it as gambling. He says working out the odds. The universe is all mathematics. So that comes from Maali, the idea that chance is the biggest factor. So you should, when you pray that your journey is safe, you're also praying to chance that some drunken driver doesn't come, and so we call it different things. So that's from Maali. But electricity comes from the dead leopard, and I think the dead leopard, I don't want to give too much away. He's perhaps the hero of the story for me.
Okay.
And the dead leopard is saying humans are savage, monkeys, they are savage. There's no animal more savage than humans, but they can invent electricity and light bulbs. And and electricity, we take it for granted, right? As if it, falls from the sky. But we didn't have electricity 100, 200 years ago. But now a power cut happens and we're cursing the government and all that. But without electricity, none of our devices, our internet, nothing would function, our cars. So something we take for granted. So the leopard sees electricity as a divine force, this invisible force that actually creates invention. So yeah, that's where these thoughts, but this epigram, I don't know, what do you even call it? Is it this little thing that you start the book with? It came right at the end when I was like looking for what's a quote that sums up the book. That was it.
It was amazing, and of course, both things, chance and electricity. I think I have to agree with Mali Almeida on this. So basically, the book is a murder mystery thriller, and it also has some romantic plot, and humor, of course. So, are you into murder mysteries and thrillers in terms of series or movies or other books too? Is this one of your favorite genres? Can you add on that?
Yeah, well, I think I started not so much these days, but I started off reading Agatha Christie. So that's what my mom she had a big library of that stuff. And that was, I guess, the first grown-up book that I read. We didn't have young adult then. We had Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew and Enid Blyton and stuff. But Agatha Christie was the first. And I went through all of those. And they're ingenious books. I mean, they're probably dated now. Though I see Poirot is still popular in cinema and television. But that set up the convention of, I didn't set it up, but I think it perfected it. This dead body, number of suspects, and then you think it's this one, that one, and there's a number of twists, and then at the end, this big... I think that, and the murder mystery also, and of course the genre has expanded since Agatha Christie, and so I do read thrillers for fun. I still, read Michael Connelly, Lee Child. Stephen King was, he's across genres. He gets pegged as a horror writer, but he's written in every sort of genre, literary works as well. But I am attracted, there is this divide between literary and genre fiction, or, I don't know, maybe it's just a bookshop divide. That's how you separate shelves in bookshops. And this feeling that literary work is somehow more valuable than genre stuff. But I think a good, well-paced thriller is a very difficult thing to craft, and when it's done well. One guy I'd like to mention, Ira Levin. He's a thriller writer, Rosemary's Baby, Boys from Brazil. I think he only wrote about 7 books in his lifetime, but they're all Stepford Wives, all classics. And a well-crafted thriller, I think, is a thing of beauty, and you shouldn't, though there are a lot of formulaic thrillers. So I read less these days, but that's kind of where I came from. And I think with the murder mystery, with the detective story, Raymond Chandler's another very different sort of thriller writer, but in terms of creating a sense of place and the literary stylings. But I think with a murder mystery, you're also allowed to offer a bit of social criticism. That's what I felt, that because you can go anywhere in that city. I think Ian Rankin said that when you're chasing a trail of a murder mystery, you can go to the lowest part of the town, you can go to the palaces. And that's also through that, but you keep the reader reading because they are intrigued to see the solution to this puzzle that you've created. Mm-hmm. But on the way, you can also talk about other things, and that's what attracted me to this device, because Chinaman's a detective story. It's a missing person story, and this cricketer's gone missing, and these 2 bumbling old men, drunk detectives they're not really detectives, but they are following the trail. So it's that puzzle that I think keeps the reader engaged. But then on the way, you can also feed different stuff. You can talk about the city that we're in or talk about wider issues. So I think it's quite a flexible genre. And I don't see any divide between literary and genre fiction. I think the best of it is literature.
Of course. So this book talks a lot about the situation in Sri Lanka, the war and its aftermath and how it's affected people. It talks about relevant contemporary issues. But the best part about it is that it also has some magic realism and imagination and fantasy added to it. So what made you decide to connect these 2 things together?
Well, I didn't think that. It's only afterwards you realize, you look at the thing you've been writing and you think, okay, what is this? Is it? And then and for me, it was just natural. The premise was it's a ghost story told by a ghost. So therefore, I had to imagine, how does a ghost, what kind of space do they inhabit? What does the reality look like to them? So I had to kind of come up or uncover a theory of the afterlife and what it looks like, and the other ghosts. That was what I was most interested in. I thought he was not a journalist, but a war photographer, talking to the other ghosts. And if a ghost is a being that's died unfairly and has a sense of injustice, Sri Lanka must be crawling with ghosts, because we've had a lot of unsolved cases and a lot of people who died under huge injustices. And so that's really where I started from. That he talks as the initial title for this book was Chats with the Dead, and that was him just interviewing the different victims of Sri Lanka's many wars. So I didn't think of it as magic realism or fantasy. It was just a ghost story, and I had to solve these problems. What did the ghosts look like? What did they have to say? What were the different types of ghosts, demons? So I researched a lot of mythologies and folklore and religious beliefs and even philosophies. And so, yeah, that's where it came from. But then also, that's one part of it. Also, he's solving his own murder when he was alive, and that had a political dimension. The fact that he was a war photographer and he had these photographs that no one had seen of atrocities. So look, there's a lot of moving parts, as you can see. The murder mystery, the political thriller, and this philosophical afterlife where you're finding your place in the universe and all of that. So the editing, it was a tough job. I didn't realize, I just, when you're writing, you're just following the story chapter by chapter, sentence by sentence. But I think when we came to edit, and it was a long 2-year editing process, that's what Natanya Jans of Sort of Books, who helped me through this manuscript. And, I can't thank her enough. All its success is owed to her. And she just said, we must make sure that all the voices aren't shouting at once, all the instruments aren't playing at once. So make sure all these elements are balanced well. But no, I didn't set out to write a crazy book that crossed genres. It's just how it turned out.
So the book was firstly Chats with the Dead, and now it's 7 Moons of Mali Almeida. So why was this change made, and was it because you had to comply with changes or pressure of the publishers? What was it?
So Chats with the Dead was the initial, so I thought it was done, and India published it. It came out in the subcontinent. And then the pandemic happened. But during the pandemic, I was, my agent and I, we struggled to find a publisher outside of the subcontinent. Even people who were receptive to Chinaman, who'd published it previously, were saying, in the UK and the US, this is a very confusing book, the Sri Lankan conflict, there's a lot of things happening here. And and it was during the pandemic, and so I went to Natanya and I said, what do I do with this thing? Is it never going to be published outside? Can it be fixed? And she said, yeah, it can. It's going to take a lot of work, but if you're up for it, let's do it. And I'm an advertising copywriter. I'm used to clients changing my copy all the time. So I just took it. Okay, it's a 400-page book, slightly harder, but I took it because she was offering good suggestions, and the book was getting better. So every 3 months, 1 month we'd just say, okay, let's make it clearer to a Western audience, or someone who knows nothing about Sri Lanka, about our conflict, let's make it accessible to them. Then the next 3 months we'd be like, okay, Mali's character is, he's not consistent, or let's work that. Then it's like, then suddenly 2021 comes, still pandemic, we're not going to get published. So then the ending's not quite landing, the beginning's confusing, and we just did a lot of work. It's the same book, but I think it's also the 7 Moons is a much pacier, it's much tighter, I think, and that's what you get from having a great editor. So I think once we finished it and we were ready to publish, we felt it wouldn't be honest to put it under the same title, because it is a different book and it's had more work done on it. So that's why we retitled it and had a new cover and so on. But I think it's a bit confusing to have 2 books, the same book in 2 different versions. So I think 7 Moons of Mali Almeida has now replaced Chats with the Dead. Though I guess Chats with the Dead will be a collector's item. But, it seems I'm doomed to write the book twice. Even Chinaman had multiple versions. It had a self-published 500-page version and then the version that it finally became. So hopefully the next book I only get to write once. Yeah.
Of course. So you mentioned that the book was made more was adapted to the Western audience who do not quite know about the situation or the history in Sri Lanka. But oftentimes, when the books are published outside South Asia, we've read situations where the writers or the editors make changes to the language or the grammar or stuff like this. But then when this happens, a writer or the book actually loses its authenticity, right? So especially when you come from South Asia, there are no names like the ones you mentioned, Salman Rushdie or Arundhati Roy, and for other writers now, Shehan Karunatilaka, of course. So do they expect you to write like these people? Or how do you not lose your authenticity as a writer, and how did you stand your ground while also collaborating with the author?
With the editor, yeah.
Yeah, the editor, I apologize.
Yeah, so like nothing is done without your consent. It's not like, so it is it's a collaboration. Like even in advertising, we always look at the client advertising agency relationship as confrontational, but I think that's the wrong attitude. I think the best work happens when it's a collaboration, when we're both trying to make this great ad campaign, or we're all trying to make this great book, and how do we do it, and what are we trying to achieve. And so I think the stuff that you mentioned about language, that's where I push back. So even with the first book, it was edited by Chikisaka Rimli Borua in India, fine editors, and and a lot of the stuff is, an editor can tell you, okay, you're taking 50 pages to say this, you can say it in 25 pages and then get to this quicker, and usually they're right, and you cut it out and the book doesn't lose anything. So stuff like that, and just like pacing wise, or you say this on page 83 and then you say this on page 93, it contradicts. Those things are very useful, and the book gets better. Stuff with language, I think initially there were few queries about the way Sri Lankans speak. So now WG and RE are two old uncles and they say, "Machan, let's put a drink," and that's not grammatically correct. But if you change it to, "Shall we have a drink?" it loses, as you say, the authenticity. So that's why I pushed back, where the syntax, I said it has to be written in an authentic Sri Lankan voice. So that stuff, it's only where the meaning is confused that you need to add. Like I don't like putting glossaries. I think they're a real bad idea, or even footnotes. So there are Sinhalese and Tamil words in, I didn't realize how many until I had to help pronunciation for the audiobook. I realized there was 300 so-called foreign words in this thing. But I think the context of it, if it hinders the understanding, because I think your goal is a reader anywhere in the world should be able to pick up your book and have an experience, whether they know you, have heard of you, or your country, or what you're writing about. That's the real sign of a good book. And so therefore make it easy for the reader, but you don't have to pander, you don't have to dilute, and so I still leave the Sri Lankan way of speaking and those words in there. But you make the story, you're polite as a writer. You don't make it difficult for them, unless you're trying to confuse them, which is a different question. So yeah, it's a delicate balance, and you need to have a fine editor and have a good relationship and understanding that you're both trying to do the same thing. But yeah, I don't see it as a negative thing if it's done properly.
All right. Yeah. So now I come to probably one of the most awaited questions for everyone watching. The Booker Prize. As a young writer, did you ever have this dream of winning something as big as this? Was the experience surreal? And also, how did you, your family, and the entire Sri Lanka react to you winning the Booker Prize?
Well, no, you don't have. Look, this is like, when you're a teenager, you hold a shampoo bottle and practice your Oscar speech. You don't. I mean, I'm sure some young actors do that, but as a young writer in Colombo, writing about cricketers and obscure subjects, you don't really. You're inspired by South Asians who win Booker Prize. So at least it is possible. Because as a kid, we didn't know it was possible to even become a writer, an artist, a filmmaker. I mean, now these are legitimate careers, but at that time it seemed like our part of the world didn't do that kind of thing. The best films were made by Hollywood or Bollywood. The best books were written out of London, and that seemed to be the norm. So I think in my 20s, that was proved, we saw, and now I think you get, just looking at Netflix, you get now hit shows from all parts of the world, especially Korea and so on. So I think at least, it's possible, but you don't think that you're going to win a Booker Prize when you write your book. When you write your first book, what you think is, when you write any book, you think, can I finish this thing? Is it going to work? Is anyone going to read this? Is it any good? And so that's what you're grappling with that. But once it's done, then you think, okay, can I get this thing published? And that was all I was thinking with the first book. And so it was a victory to get Random House India to publish it. And so those little goals you have. With the second book, I was like, okay, I want to write something different from the first. But yeah, I'd like it to be published more widely. The prizes, you can't be... The chances of you getting a prize, this is Chance and Electricity back again, are pretty, because I write short stories and I published a collection, The Birth Lottery. I wrote maybe a couple of short stories every year, and I'd submit it to all these big prizes. And yeah, I never even got a long list for even one of them. And they've had like 6,000 entries, and to make it to a short list is a great thing. So these are all lotteries as well. So I think, but I didn't stop writing short stories. So it didn't get, none of my short stories got accepted to magazines or prizes. I'd read the ones that did, and then the next year sometimes I'd write like those, or sometimes I'd think, okay, screw all that, I'm going to write my own thing. But you keep going, the prizes may inspire you, and you read, I think it gives you a list of things to read. So the Booker short, long list, the Pulitzer, whatever prize you follow. So it inspires you that way, but you never think, you don't dare think that way, because you're gonna disappoint yourself. Every time a long list comes out, when your name's not on it, it's gonna break your heart a bit. So I think writing, it's a marathon run. So you have to motivate yourself with, okay, what's the story? Can I get it done? Is it any good? Can I get it published? And so yeah, that's all I was thinking of. And when it was done, you have this moment where you just let it out to the world and you say, okay, I've done my best. Maybe someone will like it, maybe they won't, but I'm going to move on to the next one. And it's easier said than done, of course. You're waiting for it to get reviewed, or you're looking at the sales figures, so on. So that was my attitude when it went out to the went out to the publisher. And then, and I was dealing with Sri Lanka's crisis, We were in the protests, wondering what's going to happen. There was no petrol, no gas. We were in queues. Suddenly the president's house is stormed. So we were in that drama. And during that time, when I think the president had fled and my wife was in a petrol queue, I was walking my kids to class, I got this this call from Natanya and Mark saying, wow, we made the Booker long list. And and it was quite weird because I was in class. So I was like, I was quite excited. And then I thought, okay, fine. This is fantastic. This is better than the previous. At least the book will now be read and at least get reviewed. So that was how I took it, and then we were dealing with life in Sri Lanka, and then it got to the short list, and so then it's like, okay, wow, we're going to go to England now and hang out and do some scary things and have to do some scary interviews, and but I just took it that step at a time, and then so finally when I didn't, it's a 1 in 6 chance, it's a dice roll, it's back to a guess. So I was like, okay, someone else's name, they'll fine books, all 6 of them, and I thought someone else's name will get called, and then I'll have a nice holiday and get back to writing. But of course, my name got called, and then it's been chaos. It was chaos for like a month afterwards, and now it's been about 2 months, still getting used to it. So the reaction in Sri Lanka was quite overwhelming. I still haven't unclogged my inboxes, my texts and all that. I'm still answering people who congratulated me in October. So I think also it's been a tough year for Sri Lanka. So we celebrate when the cricket team does well, when the netball team does well. So I think it was well received. With anything, there'll always be a few critics and so on. But I think the majority was like, it's quite overwhelming now. Like I say, I used to just sit in a room and talk to no one all day and just read and talk to myself. And now, I get recognized on the street and I get invited to things and I have to speak. And so it's a bit weird. But, you've got to appreciate it. This is winning the lottery. So the Booker, I suppose now it means, now my 3rd book is going to get published, and now there's readers. The book is going to get read. Chinaman did okay. It's got a loyal following in the subcontinent especially, but this book is now going to be read everywhere. So it's scary stuff. It's exciting stuff, but it's wonderful as well.
Of course, I can't wait for the next book to come out, and congratulations finally for winning the Booker Prize 2022. So would you say that Shehan as a man, not a writer, has not changed at all since winning the Booker Prize, or have you changed as a person, the individual?
That's not for me to say. Ask the people around me if I'm more obnoxious or not. I hope, this is the thing. I'm going to enjoy this ride. Damon Galgut, the previous winner for The Promise, told me very kindly, it's going to be exhausting. You're not going to write another word for the next 12 months, my friend. And, so I'm going to enjoy the ride and all that. But I'm looking forward to getting back to the 3rd book, because I started it. I'm very interested in it. And that's really the game. That's the thing that we enjoy. All the other stuff you can't control. But so I'm looking forward to maybe even coming back and, renting a rooftop here and gazing at the mountains for a few months and typing. I'm looking forward to that. And yeah, getting back to playing guitar badly and being silly with the kids. Yeah, so I'd like normality to come back, but who knows? These things obviously do change you. Yes. But yeah, family keeps me grounded. Yeah.
So on that note, of course, it's a very tough situation in Sri Lanka and also in many other parts of the world, whether you look at Ukraine or Israel-Palestine conflicts. So amidst war and civil conflicts, of course, the general population, economy, society gets affected. But from an observer's point of view, I think one of the most vulnerable population during civil war are the children. Their psychology or mindset while growing up, they're just thrown out into this world of chaos and violence, right? So you've lived the situation even before, during the previous conflict in Sri Lanka and also now. How has the situation been for your children especially? What would you say about wars affecting children and their innocence and vulnerability?
Well, look, thankfully my children, there's a lot of turmoil in Sri Lanka, but there's no war. We haven't had a war for some time. So my children didn't grow up with that war. And also, look, they are living in Colombo, I guess in a middle class kind of environment, and I think the biggest thing for them has been pandemic. They're quite young, and so they've experienced just pandemic school. So they're at age 4, 5, 6, they've been on laptops, and that's, I think now they're back at school, and now that interaction is happening. But they lost a couple of years, so I think that's been an adjustment for them, and also they're hyper aware. They're hyper aware of what my son plays petrol queue, and he lines up his cars, and he knows all the characters in this, and he knows all the slogans of the Aragale. And I don't know if that's such a good thing. I wasn't that engaged when I was 5, 6 years old. So I think my kids they'll be all right. Thankfully, I have the ability to look after them, and they are in a safer environment now. But for the children of Sri Lanka, we are the crisis may not be as bad as it was, but there is rampant inflation still. The cost of living is still sky high, and a lot of the population are losing their unemployment is high and are being pushed into poverty. And I've seen the latest figures: 20-25% of Sri Lankans will be pushed to the brink of poverty and beyond. And what that means is that children are not getting 3 meals a day. They can't afford their school books, and so I think that's a real crisis which maybe we don't see in Colombo. Because if you go to Colombo now, it's Christmas and the lights are on and people are partying and spending. But I am afraid that we do have this crisis for our children. So that I can only speak to that. Talking about war-torn areas, that's that's a whole different subject. And I think, thankfully, and I hope Sri Lanka doesn't have to go through another period like that. But I think, if when people are hungry, when people are desperate, then social unrest can lead to political upheaval. So I don't mean to be too doom and gloom, but I don't think the worst is behind us. I think there are challenging times ahead. So that's what I really feel for, and I hope that governments and individuals are doing things for their less fortunate, because Sri Lanka is going to struggle, and I do feel for that generation who's grown up with the pandemic and now has to grow up with this crisis. And I think these things are usually healed by a generation through education and things. So if we are failing our young now, we're sowing these seeds for more future turmoil and catastrophes. So so this is something I'm concerned about, but I think I hope Sri Lankans in general are, and things are being done to prevent these.
Of course, during any times of peril, whether it's a war or civil conflicts or political instability, I think, all the populations are significantly affected, but there are these minorities and systematically disenfranchised communities or the marginalized. And one among such community all over the world is the LGBTQ plus community, whose rights, although have been recognized and the movements for their rights have snowballed everywhere. But when you look at in South Asia, if I have to talk about Nepal, it is actually one of the nations which has been very progressive in terms of LGBTQ plus rights, although it the same-sex marriages has not been, I don't know, legally or socially accepted. But the character of your book, Mali Almeida, he's a closeted gay. And what do you feel about the issue of homosexuality, or what are your views on LGBTQ plus rights and activism?
So I think when I was writing this character, I would have thought, I started this around 2013, 14, and I guess and also I'm writing about 89, and the fact is in 89, LGBTQ didn't even exist as a term, as far as I was, certainly not to mainstream, and the only type of gay man you could possibly be in Colombo, or perhaps in many parts of the world, was a closeted gay person, because there was. We've had a lot of progress, especially in the last 10 years. So I was more interested, I was just writing from that perspective, and also drawing on what he would have been like. And also, it played for his character, the fact that he had a lot of secrets. This was the biggest one, and it sort of played into that character. I wasn't really thinking that I was writing an LGBTQ novel. I mean, how can I do that? There's people much more qualified to do that. I didn't, So it's a bit strange that that detail was there as part of his character, and I don't think it's particularly a gay novel or LGBTQ novel. It just happens to be a trait of his character, and it informs his love affairs and his dealings. So that was my perspective when I was writing. I just hoped that and so I did my research, that I talked to gay men, talked to friends, and just got an understanding of gay men who lived during that period, what it must have been like to be gay during 89, 90. So that's all that I was doing there. But I suppose since it's come out and now it's much more part of the conversation, in Sri Lanka, I don't think we're particularly a homophobic society, not at a cellular level, not at an interpersonal level, but the legislature certainly isn't there. I don't think there are any rights or there are any legalities, certainly not same-sex relationships and so on. And of course, there's the LGBTQ community, but I think this agenda, every time it gets brought to the political arena, no politician is willing to get behind it. But one thing I did see during the Aragalaya, during the struggle, they had a pride parade in Colombo, which is the first I've ever seen in my life. And the Aragalaya, it was made up of many Sri Lankans from different generations and races, but it was predominantly the young, and I think they don't have the hang-ups that are maybe parents' generations and perhaps my generation have, and I think they are quite inclusive sexuality-wise, gender-wise, even racially, and I think so that was a good sign. It was wonderful to see that. And let's see this is part of, I think, the young political movements have a much more progressive view of the world and aren't making the same mistakes that have led us to Sri Lanka to be so divided. So that is my hope, that when this generation gets to this political stage, that these issues will be part of the agenda and be addressed. But at present, I would say, while the legislature it's certainly not where the rest of the world is, Look, I can't speak to the experience of LGBTQ people presently, because I was just staying within my lane and just talking about that experience of a particular character. But I think there's a long way to go. But I do think that Sri Lankans are generally, at a basic human level, are quite inclusive and accepting of diversity. I just think these issues, at election cycles, we tend to emphasize our divisions, but I think as Sri Lankans, I think we're quite more accepting. So I'm hopeful that once we have a new generation of political leadership, these issues will be addressed.
Of course, I already have a cue that we've crossed the line, the time limit. But I have one final question for you. So one of my favorite movies is this movie, The Bang Bang Club. If you've watched it, it's about Kevin Carter and their groups and their war photography during the conflict after the apartheid in South Africa. So I am a journalism student and I like photography, and Mali Almeida is a war photographer. So even as people who aspire to be correspondents, in terms of security of journalists, in terms of stability, financial, whether it's financial security, everything, what do you think South Asian journalism needs to do? Because these areas, whether it's Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, or Sri Lanka, unfortunately have a lot of conflicts, and journalists are being killed or massacred, or even during civil wars in Nepal, we had a lot of journalists who lost their lives, and even Mali Almeida, who has been murdered. So briefly, could you tell us how the situations could be better for war photographers, correspondents, or journalists?
That's a big question. Yeah, I did watch the Bang Bang Club, Kevin Carter, and I interviewed Stephen Champion, who was the chronicler of Sri Lanka Civil War, Dominic Sansoni, and later I find out William Dalrymple was in Sri Lanka during that time. And he was telling me some harrowing stories of what he'd been through. But look, I can't speak to, I became a copywriter. I didn't, so to speak to journalists and their issues and so on. But all I can say is from outside, we have had periods where it's been a torrid time to be, a very dangerous time to be journalists. We had periods where journalists were killed in broad daylight or go disappearing. And lately, I don't know, the freedom of speech in Sri Lanka is a right we've exercised through the struggle and through Twitter and Facebook and all these online platforms, and I hope that is preserved, because really for journalists, they are the heroes of our part of the world. Like, people ask, how come you always write about journalists? Why not you're writing a detective story? Where are the detectives? And it's just that in our part, or certainly in Sri Lanka, crimes don't get solved. So the detective that solves the crime, like Hercule Poirot or Sherlock Holmes, is going to be a fiction for me, whereas it's the journalists who are going out there, finding the truth, writing about it, and paying with their lives. So I think they are the real heroes of our part of the world, and if that's the first sign that the society is in decline and it's going to be a tough time for citizens, if the journalists, they are literally the front line. And so making it more safe, I think this is something we should as a society protect, and that we should not tolerate, and we should not tolerate governments that do this, and we should not, because once you start stifling that expression, that's when we know how history turns out after that. So look, I can't give you any practical advice here. I think it's beyond my pay grade, but I would say journalists need to be protected, and they are the heroes of both my books and maybe more books to come.
Of course. So before we end, has there ever been any question that you've always wanted to be asked?
Any question I always want to know. I think everyone's covered. They've covered my music. They covered my facial hair, my fashion. No. I like to ask the questions generally. Yeah. So no. I think you've covered a lot of ground. I think it's been fine.
All right.
Thank you very much.
So this was Shehan Karunatilaka, the Booker Prize 2022 winner. We talked about his books, his style, his aspirations, political views, and a lot of topics. Nepal Literature Festival is more than honored to have you here, sir. And Pokhara, of course, amidst these mountains. And thank you for your presence, for bringing your family and celebrating Christmas with us. And we hope and expect you to be a part of Nepal Literature Festival in its future iterations. So thank you very much, and thank you.
Thank you. It's been a joy and an honor, and yes, I'm certainly coming back to this very spot, and I'm going to write something, at least a sentence. But thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.